Okay, so I'm here and I'm going live with our Inspiri, and we are continuing this conversation on the poor. Today it's going to be about the poor, oppression, and abundance. So let's get started. If you hear thunder in the background, it's because that there's a thunderstorm happening right now, and I'm still recording to make sure that you have really the pieces of everything that you need. I'll say it that way. So a thunderstorm doesn't stop me from doing a live or from doing a video for you, right? It does not hinder me um, getting you the information that you need, but also to help you to better understand what's truly happening as decisions are made through this time. So let's get started. I've seen some people, again, having issues with what has been said, and that's fine. People can have issues with it, whatever, not with what I've said, but what other people have said. So that we've already addressed in previous videos, but I'm going to keep moving forward on this because there's a huge piece that I still have not stated and is a truth that people also need to know about. So for many people that know me, you know that I am friends with different business owners, entrepreneurs, people in different fields across the globe, across the spectrum, across the board, different industries. You also know that I am aware of theories on abundance and this idea that if you do not focus on the poor or focus on poverty, then you're able to pull yourself out of abundance. And we're going to address this a little bit too, because it's an important topic to address. There's a lot that is involved in all of this. So when we're talking about the poor, and again, tomorrow is World Day of the Poor, there's many different dynamics and situations where someone becomes poverty stricken, AKA poor, right? So, and there's different types of poverty, which Gutierrez also discusses and tries to address and say, first and foremost, what's really important is to have a form of spiritual poverty in the aspect that you have true humility, right? Which goes to your greatness and the presence of God in your life and admitting that God is present in your life and God is the one who's really in control. So there's that. And that's very different than someone else having control or being controlling. And it's also very different than someone purposely trying to humiliate you or to force you to have humility, right? There's a lot of difference there. Another aspect to this dynamic is that we as an organization and myself as an individual have seen, like I've said in previous videos, abuses across the board on different topics in relation to poverty. So one of the really important things for me to state is that within couples and within marriages, right, we see there is a tendency, and it's not all marriages, but where there is a lack of respect, etc. We see that men will frequently use money as a way to control women. Men will purposely withhold money from women to make women and force women to do what they want. In that aspect, the man creates physical poverty for the woman and spiritual poverty in certain ways, depending on how extreme the manipulations, the control is, and how disrespectful the other person is to the female, the woman. So, and we've seen it in other relationships too, but it's very clear in this dynamic, and it has to do with a power dynamic, has to do with manipulation, abuse, and control. So to blame people for their poverty in itself in certain ways is unjust, depending on what that really looks like for them. And if you don't know them and you haven't talked to them and you haven't actually communicated with them as to what the causes are, you cannot judge them. That's number one. Number two is, even if you know you are not that person and you do not know what they lived through, you don't know what they've tried to overcome, unless they are actually telling you their truth, you don't know. You don't. So to sit back and to say that certain people cause their own poverty, that's not really the case. Or even to walk by homeless people and think that you know how they became homeless. You don't, unless you actually have that conversation, unless you actually take the time to talk to them. You don't know. So you really have no place to judge. And even if you do know, even if they confide in you and tell you what that truth has been, you are still not in a place to judge them. You are not the ultimate judge. You are not. So to take that to the next level, we haven't just seen this in relationship dynamics like in that case, right? We've also seen this between different countries and between different governments too, where money is used to control different people and different populations in different countries, where money is withheld to cause poverty so that people do not have what they need, to force people to do what is wanted or desired by the other country, government, leader, whatever the case may be. That is just as unjust. That is just as unjust as a spouse withholding money from someone. It is just as unjust, especially if the spouse is trying to force the other spouse to do something that is not in alignment with what God would be asking them to do. Or it's being used as a way to control the other person in the relationship, to force the other person to do something. God is not a God that forces people to do things. God is a God who lets people choose. That's who God is. God gives choices and options. And God is an abundant God. God is not a scarce God. God is about abundance. God is all abundant, all merciful, all loving, all kind, all generous. So when looking at the topic of the poor, as well as spiritual movement and political movements, it's really important to recognize and own that fact also, that this is a truth for many people, especially right now during the pandemic, especially right now and throughout this whole time during the pandemic. So you cannot just pretend it's not present or pretend it doesn't exist. It's clear that it does. And to say that it's actually someone like that person's fault that they are now in poverty, that's not necessarily the case. There are many cases where governments will purposely hold back money or purposely cause problems with certain individuals so that they do not have what they need, as a way to control that person and to silence them. We have seen it throughout history. This has happened throughout history. It doesn't just happen in people's relationships, it also happens on another level, within countries, within government, within politics. So that is a dynamic that also needs to change. It is a dynamic that needs to change. The other point to this, I'm going back into Gutierrez because this is really, and we will revisit what I just said, but Gutierrez's points are very important. So I need to go back to something in relation to Gutierrez. So just give me 1 minute while I pull up the thing for you that you need. I kind of have to move this. So if you see this thing moving, it's because I have to be able to pull up the piece to actually advise you on my computer. So I've already stated Gutierrez studied medicine and literature, psychology and philosophy, and obtained a doctorate, right? To go back to his idea of what true liberation is, it has 3 dimensions. First, it involves political and social liberation, the elimination of the immediate cause of poverty and injustice. Second, liberation involves the emancipation of the poor, the marginalized, the downtrodden, and the oppressed from all those things that limit their capacity to develop themselves freely and in dignity. Third, liberation theology involves liberation from selfishness and sin, a reestablishment of a relationship with God and with other people. Liberation theology and Gutierrez, again, they've both been subject to scrutiny, right, for the theories. But, and it's not just theory, it's a truth. If governments are purposely causing the people to be poor or withholding what the people need, it is unjust. It is unjust. If they are purposely causing people to go into poverty, it is unjust. If they're targeting certain people to go into poverty, if they're forcing people to not say yes to what God would be asking them to do with their life, or forcing them to not be liberated in their, what is the word I'm looking for? Not to be liberated in their capacity to develop themselves freely and in dignity, then it is a major problem. It is a major problem. People have the right to pursuit of happiness. People have the right to use their gifts and talents for the good of other people and all of humanity. They have an inherent right to do that. This is part of where I said yesterday, you actually do have an obligation. You do have an obligation. If you know that people are poor in your country, you have an obligation to do something to help and alleviate whatever's happening, to help them to reconnect to developing themselves freely and with dignity. If a government is limiting that, it's unjust. If a government is purposely silencing people in that way, also, it's unjust. So all of that also needs to be looked at when having these conversations, right? And when really talking about this idea of political movements, right? And why certain political movements are happening in the spirit that's backing them or is not backing them, right? So according to Gutierrez, one of the first dimensions of liberation itself involves political and social liberation. It involves that because Gutierrez recognizes that some of these topics and areas and concrete issues in countries are caused by political systems, are caused by social institutions or social factors that were in countries before change actually started to happen, before a country moves into a new norm. So he recognized that in the country that he was in and stood up for this topic, this area, for those reasons. He saw the oppression present. He knew the people who were being oppressed. And let me be clear here, countries or individuals forcing other people to be poverty-stricken is a form of oppression. It is. Whether you choose to label it that or not, it is a form of oppression. When a married couple has a bank account together and one of the spouses goes and takes all the money and puts it in a different bank and leaves the other spouse with nothing for their needs, it is control, manipulation, abuse, and oppression. So to try to justify that, or to try to justify a country that does something like that, is unjust in itself. It's a little different if banks need to be shut down because of, something in particular to reopen them, right? But even in that case, the people are not to be left without their needs being met. So this also goes back to this topic that we addressed in the past, and that we're going to need to address again. I'm trying to move my Zoom screen back up. Hold on. And that goes even to international debt forgiveness. If you know that there are countries who are saddling a major debt or a major debt that was especially given in a way to oppress the people and to keep them from bettering themselves or whatever, you again have a duty and an obligation to help relieve that country and to focus on international debt forgiveness. It's the same thing in a court of law between spouses, right? If a spouse does something like what I've just labeled, the lawyer has every right and an obligation to say something, to make it known that that is what the other spouse did, right? And to make it known the truth of that situation and to advocate for debt forgiveness if the person had to go in debt because of it. It is the same thing. To go back to Gutierrez, when things do not change, when countries do not create that change in a positive way for the people, other countries do have a right to, to stand up and say something. And that wasn't what I was originally going to say. It goes back to this whole fact of Gutierrez and political and social movements. In this regard, people have a right to protest. People have a right to social justice. They have a right to it, and they have a right to stand up for it. Because God is also a just God. God does not support oppression. That's not who God is, and it's not part of God's character. So there's a lot with everything I just said. That goes for a relationship, that goes for a government, that goes for a country, that goes for an employer or a previous employer, that goes with an organization that you're working for. All of it. All of it. Part of the abundance piece is that God is all abundant. Trust that. Trust that. The other piece is God is for freedom and liberation, for the good of the human spirit, so that the Holy Spirit moves through people and has breathing room and has space to move through humanity and the globe. The Holy Spirit is not stagnant. That's the opposite of what the Holy Spirit is. The Holy Spirit frees people for the good and liberates. That's part of the character of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is a liberator. The Holy Spirit is free and freeing. And again, we've had this conversation with different couples also when they go to make the commitment to marriage and everything else. When you go to make that deeper commitment and saying yes to that, in relationships that are really healthy, and even in relationships in certain ways that are unhealthy, but not abusive, etc. The Holy Spirit is what brings that couple to deeper freedom with each other, deeper liberation in their relationship and with each other in a positive and healthy way. It deepens their love for each other. So, and again, what goes against that love would be the opposite of that, or the spouses not treating each other with love would go against that. It would conflict with that, especially when there is abuse present, especially in the case and scenario that I just gave. So it's the same with countries and governments and employers. All of those dynamics should be leading you to deeper love and commitment, right? Sometimes we see this play out in deeper rights being honored and respected at a deeper level, right? Or overcoming the oppression present in social institutions or in politics. Or even now through the pandemic, the Holy Spirit has been moving through the pandemic to create greater change in a positive and healthy way that's good for all of humanity. That's one reason why COP26 has been so important, the G20, all of the communications between different governments and world leaders, as well as the vaccines that are being rolled out and people having access and figuring out paths forward through each piece, how to reopen the economies, how to help people to really be in unity with each other, in deeper unity and deeper conversation and deeper communication and deeper collaboration. Despite what has happened in the past, right? Despite that factor of previous conflicts or previous, whatever between countries. It's really, and we've said this multiple times, it's really about that better way forward now and what that looks like. In some countries, that is going to include movements. It is going to include social movements. It's going to create positive change. That's what the Holy Spirit is about, to make sure that we are forever growing in a beautiful way and deepening our love on multiple levels of our lives. And to undo injustice, to make things more just. And loving and kind and merciful. So I think I'll leave you with that for now. And know that the Holy Spirit is moving through all of it. But that piece did need to be said. The abundance factor, when you focus on abundance, yes, it pulls you out of poverty, but know that half the entrepreneurs that I know, literally that work on this piece and discuss abundance with people and focus on this topic, their work focuses on helping the person overcome poverty in their own life in the different ways. That's one of the things that we do with our own coaching program, right? How to overcome that, how to overcome what is holding you back and focus on abundance, so more abundance flows into your life because God is all abundant. It is that, and Gutierrez discusses this. Gutierrez also focused on who God is and who God is not in his theology. He owns and recognizes that God is an abundant God, that we have an abundant God who loves us and cares about us and is kind and merciful, who cares about the needs of every single person, even when other people have told them otherwise, even when other people have oppressed them, even when other people have tried to control them with money or by money. Even when people have abused their power. So that all needs to be looked at and focused on and changed. And changed. And the other thing I'm going to say is that the judgments need to stop, right? When one of the major things that we see with women, this goes back to women, and I know it happens with many people, not just women, but I'm going to use women as an example. One of the many things that we see with women is when women want to change their lives for the better and for the good, Other women and other people always judge them. Always judge them. Even when they have no idea. And even when they haven't actually, like, even in the case where they just see the woman and they judge her on the outside, even when they haven't even talked to her, or they've heard about part of her story, right? No one, no one has a right to judge someone in that way. No one, especially when women are trying to change their lives for the better, or want to let go of something like an old habit or an old way of existing in the world, right? So, and we even see this example when women want to change their careers or choose, want to have a baby instead, and put time and money and energy into having a baby instead of focusing so much on their careers. Or, there's many examples where they want to go travel instead of always being tied to their desk, or want to be in a relationship that's loving, kind, and caring, where before they were not in one. We see judgments fly like crazy. We see the same thing with the homeless and those who are poverty stricken. It needs to stop. That does not solve anything. That creates more hatred and more oppression. That continues the oppression. That's all it does. So even that needs to be looked at. If you're really serious about alleviating poverty and really overcoming obstacles for the poor, those are all part of it. And again, this isn't just a financial poverty. It has to do with spiritual poverty too, because there are also people who try to make you spiritually poor, who try to bring you down from your faith, who try to make you not believe, who try to force you to only believe what they believe, who try to oppress you and live your life a certain way that's only the way that they think you can live your life. That's just control. Again, that is control. Because the Holy Spirit doesn't do things like that. The Holy Spirit doesn't operate that way. So if somebody is trying to, like, when you have a beautiful faith life and someone's trying to purposely make you spiritually poor to do your faith the way that they think you should do your faith, or be in your faith the way they think you should be in your faith, that's not it. God always gives options. God didn't just create one human being. God created every single human being, all different. Options, right? God wasn't like, let me make every single human being look exactly the same and function exactly the same way and have the same hairstyle and the same clothing and the same everything. That's not who God is. Like, God didn't do that back when he created humanity. God isn't that type of God. God is very creative. God created individuality and uniqueness and values that. God didn't create everybody to look exactly the same, or to do exactly the same thing, or to function in exactly the same way. That's why everybody has their own personality too, right? Their own gifts and talents. So own and recognize the truth of what the Holy Spirit really is and the Spirit is. because that'll help you navigate through this whole area, and how the Holy Spirit calls people to be present and to create the changes, to help create the changes so that people are more loving, kind, and merciful, individually and as a human race. All right, I'm leaving it at that. Ciao and arrivederci.